Watch what happens when someone truly powerful enters a room. Not the person who announces themselves with energy and enthusiasm. Not the one who immediately starts filling the space with words and presence. But the other one. The one who walks in quietly, finds their position, and simply observes. There's something about that stillness that changes the entire atmosphere. People become aware of themselves. Conversations adjust their volume. The room reorganizes itself around this silent center. This isn't coincidence. This is physics. And Machiavelli spent his life studying this particular kind of gravity. We've built an entire culture around the idea that influence requires visibility. That leadership means speaking up, taking space, making your voice heard. Social media has accelerated this belief into a kind of performance anxiety where silence feels like disappearance and restraint feels like irrelevance. But here's the paradox that Machiavelli identified in the courts of Renaissance Italy. The moment you feel compelled to speak, you've already lost a measure of control. Not because speaking is weak, but because compulsion is. The person who must speak is being controlled by the room. The person who chooses when to speak controls it. Think about the last meeting you were in where someone dominated the conversation. They had opinions on everything. They responded to every point. They filled every pause. Did you respect them more or less by the end? Most people, if they're honest, will admit they respected them less. Not because the person was wrong, but because they seemed desperate. Desperate to be heard. Desperate to matter. Desperate to prove their value through constant verbal output. And desperation, Machiavelli understood, is the opposite of power. Silence is uncomfortable because it's ambiguous. When someone speaks, you know what they're thinking, what they want, where they stand. You can categorize them, predict them, manage them. But silence? Silence could mean anything. Agreement or disagreement. Contemplation or dismissal. Confidence or calculation. This ambiguity is precisely what makes silence powerful. It forces everyone else in the room to project meaning onto you. And here's the crucial insight. People almost always project power onto silence. There's a neurological reason for this. The human brain is a meaning-making machine. We can't tolerate ambiguity. When we encounter it, we immediately start filling it in with our own interpretations. And in social hierarchies, which we've been navigating for millions of years, silence from someone who seems composed reads as dominance. It suggests that this person has already processed what everyone else is still figuring out. That they're several moves ahead. That they're choosing not to speak rather than unable to speak. And choice, in any context, is the fundamental marker of power. Machiavelli watched this dynamic play out in the Florentine courts with clinical precision. The advisors who spoke constantly were the ones who got used and discarded. The ones who spoke sparingly, who let others exhaust themselves in debate before offering a single clear observation, those were the ones who accumulated real influence. Not because they were smarter, though some were, but because they understood that words are currency. And like any currency, they lose value through inflation. Every word you speak is a commitment. It's a position you're taking, a stance you're defending, a piece of yourself you're making available for judgment. The more you speak, the more material you give others to work with. They can quote you back to yourself. They can find contradictions. They can detect uncertainty in your phrasing. But silence? Silence gives them nothing. It's a perfect defense because there's nothing to attack. And simultaneously, it's a perfect offense because it draws out everyone else's positions while revealing none of yours. Jung would recognize this as a kind of shadow work, though from an unexpected angle. Most people think of the shadow as the dark parts we repress: anger, desire, aggression. But for many of us, especially those who've been socialized to be accommodating and expressive, The shadow includes our capacity for strategic restraint. We've learned that silence is rude, that not contributing is lazy, that withholding your thoughts is antisocial. So we've repressed the part of ourselves that knows how to be still, how to observe, how to let others reveal themselves while we remain unrevealed. Integrating this particular shadow means reclaiming your right to silence, not as punishment or passive aggression, but as a legitimate form of engagement. It means recognizing that listening can be more active than speaking, that observation can be more influential than participation. This is uncomfortable because it contradicts everything we've been taught about collaboration and teamwork. But Machiavelli wasn't interested in making people comfortable. He was interested in revealing how power actually moves through human systems. Consider a negotiation. Two parties sit down. One comes in ready to talk, eager to establish rapport, quick to fill any silence with conversation. The other comes in calm, speaks only to answer direct questions, and seems perfectly content to let silence stretch. Who's more likely to get what they want? History and psychology both say the silent one, because they're not using their discomfort with silence as a guide for when to speak. They're using strategy, and everyone on the other side can feel the difference. This isn't about being cold or withholding. It's about understanding that every social interaction has a tempo, a rhythm of tension and release. Most people are so uncomfortable with tension that they immediately release it through speech. They jump in to ease the awkwardness, to smooth over the uncomfortable pause, to keep things moving. But that tension is information. It's telling you where the pressure points are, what people are anxious about, what they're trying to avoid. When you speak to release it, you lose that information. When you sit with it, you learn everything. Machiavelli's genius was seeing that power isn't about having the best arguments or the most information. It's about controlling the frame within which arguments happen and information gets interpreted. And silence is the ultimate frame control. Because when you're silent, you're not inside anyone else's frame. You're not responding to their agenda or their questions or their provocations. You're simply there, a presence that can't be drawn into games you haven't agreed to play. There's a specific kind of respect that silence commands. It's not the respect of admiration or affection. It's the respect of uncertainty. When people can't quite read you, when they're not sure if you agree or disagree, approve or disapprove, they become more careful. They self-edit. They try to figure out what you're thinking before they commit to a position. And in that trying, they give you something invaluable. They reveal their actual thoughts before they've had a chance to strategically package them. The mechanism is subtle but devastating once you see it. In any group dynamic, there's a constant negotiation happening beneath the surface. People are testing boundaries, establishing hierarchies, figuring out who matters and who doesn't. And one of the primary ways we do this is through speech patterns. Who speaks first? Who speaks most? Whose statements get challenged and whose get accepted? These aren't random. They're the visible manifestation of invisible power structures. When you speak frequently, you're participating in this negotiation on equal terms with everyone else. Your ideas compete with their ideas. Your assertions get tested against their assertions. You're in the arena, and in the arena, you can lose. But when you speak rarely, you step outside the negotiation. You become the observer of it. And observers, by definition, are above what they're observing. This isn't manipulation. It's positional awareness. You're choosing where to stand in relation to the dynamic rather than getting swept into it. Nietzsche had a name for what happens when you get swept into these dynamics: reactive mode. You're reacting to what others say, defending against their challenges, responding to their frame. This is the mode most people operate in most of the time. They're not authors of the conversation. They're characters in someone else's story. And the exhaustion this creates is profound. Because reactive mode requires constant vigilance. You have to track what everyone's saying, anticipate objections, prepare responses. You're always one step behind, always playing defense. Strategic silence flips this entirely. Instead of reacting, you're observing the patterns of reaction. You're watching who always needs to respond, who can't let a point go unchallenged, who's using speech to manage their own anxiety. And this observation isn't cold or judgmental. It's simply clear. You're seeing the system rather than being the system. And this clarity is power because it gives you choice about when and how to engage. Machiavelli would have seen this play out in council meetings where matters of state hung in the balance. The advisors who spoke first committed to positions before they understood the full landscape. The ones who spoke passionately revealed their biases and priorities. The ones who spoke extensively gave away their reasoning process. And then there was always one, maybe two, who waited. Who listened to all of it. Who let the room exhaust itself. And when they finally spoke, their words carried disproportionate weight. Not because they said anything particularly brilliant, but because they demonstrated mastery over the most difficult thing, their own impulse to be heard. This mastery is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation. It's the capacity to separate your sense of self from the collective's approval. Most of us derive our feeling of existence from being acknowledged. Someone speaks to us, we respond, and in that exchange we confirm that we matter. Silence threatens this. It feels like we're disappearing, becoming irrelevant, losing our place in the social order. But this fear is exactly what keeps us trapped in reactive mode. We speak to prove we're here. And in proving we're here, we become predictable, manageable, controllable. The transformation happens when you realize that your existence doesn't depend on constant verbal confirmation. You can be in the room, fully present, deeply engaged, and say nothing. And not only do you not disappear, you become more visible. Because you're the still point in a room of motion. You're the silence in a field of noise. And everyone can feel you there, precisely because you're not trying to make them feel you. There's a practical element to this that's worth examining. In any complex discussion, there's a point where people stop saying new things and start repeating variations of the same positions. This is the noise phase. Everyone's committed to their stance, and now they're just reinforcing it through repetition and emphasis. If you're speaking during this phase, you're part of the noise. Your words blend into the general chaos of people trying to be heard. But if you're silent during this phase, you're conserving energy and gathering information. And then there's a moment, always, when the noise exhausts itself. When people realize they're just repeating themselves. When the energy starts to deflate. This is when the room becomes receptive. This is when one clear statement can cut through everything that came before. And if you've been silent, if you've been watching and listening while everyone else was performing, you know exactly what that statement needs to be. You've seen where the real disagreement is, what the actual fears are, what resolution might look like. And you can speak to that directly while everyone else is still lost in their own noise. Machiavelli's strategy of silence isn't about never speaking. It's about speaking last and least. It's about letting others define the territory before you take your position. Because once you understand the territory, you can choose the strongest ground. Once you see what others want, you can frame your wants in relation to theirs. Once you know what battles are being fought, you can decide which ones matter. This requires patience, which is another name for power. The person who needs immediate gratification, who needs to be heard right now, who can't stand being unknown for even a moment, that person is controlled by their needs. The person who can wait, who can sit with the discomfort of being underestimated or overlooked, who can let the room think they have nothing to offer until the moment they offer it, that person is self-controlled. And self-control is the only control that matters. There's a reason why the phrase, "speak softly and carry a big stick," resonates. It's not just about being polite while maintaining strength. It's about understanding that the stick, the actual power, doesn't need to announce itself constantly. In fact, constant announcement weakens it. The power that has to remind everyone it's powerful isn't. Real power is quiet because it doesn't need validation. It knows what it is. This is deeply counterintuitive in our current cultural moment. We're drowning in voices, everyone competing for attention, everyone trying to establish their expertise or relevance or value through constant content creation. The idea of being silent feels like suicide. Like if you're not constantly producing, constantly visible, constantly engaged, you'll be forgotten. And maybe that's true for some contexts. But Machiavelli wasn't writing about how to be famous. He was writing about how to be powerful. And these are very different things. Fame requires visibility. Power requires respect. And respect doesn't come from how much you speak. It comes from how much weight your words carry when you do speak. And weight comes from scarcity combined with precision. If you speak rarely but accurately, people learn to listen when you talk. If you speak constantly, they learn to wait for you to stop. There's a specific skill that silence develops, something Machiavelli would have recognized immediately: the ability to read a room. Not just to sense the general mood, but to understand the specific architecture of power and desire that's operating beneath the surface. Who's aligned with whom? Who's pretending to agree but actually opposes? What's being said versus what's being meant? These things are invisible if you're talking. They're obvious if you're watching. Every group has a hidden structure. On the surface, there might be an official hierarchy, a stated agenda, explicit rules of engagement. But underneath, there's the real structure. Who actually makes decisions? Who influences whom? Where the real allegiances lie? What people actually want versus what they claim to want? And this real structure only becomes visible when you stop participating and start observing. Jung would call this working with the collective unconscious. There are dynamics in every group that no one's consciously aware of but everyone's responding to. Patterns of dominance and submission, unspoken alliances, hidden resentments. These shape everything that happens, but they operate below the level of explicit communication. When you're speaking, you're operating at the explicit level. You're caught in the content of what's being said. But when you're silent, you can see the structure that's determining how that content gets received. This is why silent people are often perceived as either very wise or vaguely threatening. They're seeing something that the speakers can't see because the speakers are too busy being seen. And this perception isn't wrong. There is something threatening about someone who understands the game better than the people playing it. It means they can't be easily manipulated. They can't be drawn into conflicts that don't serve them. They can't be made to reveal more than they want to reveal. Machiavelli's observation was that this kind of visibility, the ability to see the real structure, is more valuable than almost any other skill in politics. Because once you see it, you can work with it instead of against it. You know who to align with, what to push for, when to withdraw. You're operating with a map that others don't have, and all it requires is the discipline to be quiet and pay attention. But this discipline is harder than it sounds. We're hardwired for social bonding through communication. Silence can trigger anxiety, make us feel excluded, activate our fear of rejection. Every moment we're not speaking, part of our brain is screaming that we're losing status, becoming invisible, missing our chance to matter. This is the voice that ruins everything. Because acting on this anxiety is exactly how you lose the game. The practice is to feel that anxiety and not act on it. To notice the urge to speak, the pressure to contribute, the fear of being forgotten, and to simply sit with it. This is meditation in real time. It's the same muscle you develop sitting on a cushion watching thoughts arise and pass, except now you're doing it in a conference room or at a dinner party. You're learning to separate the urge from the action. And in that separation, you find freedom. Nietzsche's concept of will to power applies here in its truest form. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The capacity to not be controlled by your impulses, your anxieties, your need for approval. When you can sit in a room full of people speaking and feel no compulsion to join them, when you can let others think you have nothing to say and not be bothered by it, you've achieved a kind of internal sovereignty that most people never reach. This sovereignty changes everything about how you show up in the world. You're no longer performing. You're not managing your image or trying to control how others perceive you. You're simply present, observing, responding when it serves your actual goals rather than when anxiety demands it. And people feel this. They might not understand it consciously, but they sense that you're operating from a different center than everyone else. There's a specific moment in any group dynamic where this becomes obvious. Someone says something provocative, something designed to get a reaction. Everyone else immediately responds, defending or attacking, explaining or justifying. But you don't. You just sit there, maybe with a slight smile, maybe with a neutral expression. And suddenly all that reactive energy has nowhere to go. The provocateur has to recalibrate. Everyone else has to wonder what you're thinking. And you've demonstrated, without saying a word, that you can't be baited. This is control without speaking. Not control over others, but control over the dynamic. You're refusing to participate in the game that's being set up. And by refusing, you're changing the game entirely. Because now it's not about who has the best response to the provocation. It's about the fact that one person in the room couldn't be provoked. And that fact is more interesting than anything anyone said. Machiavelli would have seen this as strategic genius. In a world where everyone's competing for attention and validation, the person who doesn't need either has an insurmountable advantage. They can't be manipulated through flattery or intimidated through criticism. They're not playing the status games that consume everyone else's energy. They're simply watching those games, understanding them, and choosing when and how to participate on their own terms. This doesn't mean being passive. Silence is an active choice, a strategic position. You're constantly making decisions about when to speak and when to remain quiet. You're constantly processing information, reading the room, understanding the dynamics. You're just doing all of this without announcing it. And this hidden activity is what makes silence so powerful. Everyone else thinks you're just sitting there. They don't realize you're working. The hidden cost of constant speech is that it prevents this kind of work. When you're always talking, you're always in output mode. You're not processing deeply. You're not seeing patterns. You're not connecting dots. You're just responding, reacting, producing content in real time. And this might feel productive, but it's actually the opposite. You're using your energy without accumulating anything. You're spinning wheels without moving forward. Strategic silence, by contrast, is accumulation. Every moment you're not speaking is a moment you're learning something, seeing something, understanding something. You're gathering information that speakers are broadcasting. You're watching patterns that participants can't see because they're part of the pattern. And all of this accumulates into a kind of understanding that becomes power when you finally choose to speak. The transformation from reactive speaker to strategic silent observer doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice that requires constant attention and course correction. You'll slip back into reactive mode. You'll feel the pull to explain yourself, to contribute, to be heard. And that's fine. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness. Can you notice when you're speaking from anxiety versus strategy? Can you catch yourself before you fill every silence? Can you sit with the discomfort of being unknown? Start small. In low-stakes conversations, practice letting pauses extend. When someone says something and looks at you expectantly, try waiting 3 seconds before responding. Notice what happens. Notice how they start to elaborate on their own point. Notice how they reveal more than they intended to because they're trying to fill the silence you've created. This is information you wouldn't have gotten if you jumped in immediately with your response. Then scale it up. In meetings, practice speaking half as much as you normally would. Not by suppressing yourself, but by being more selective. Before you speak, ask yourself, is this necessary? Does it add something new? Or am I just speaking to feel like I'm participating? Most of the time, if you're honest, it's the latter. And once you see this clearly, it becomes easier to choose silence. The fear that arises here is real. You'll worry that people will think you're not engaged, not smart, not valuable. But here's what actually happens. They start to wonder what you're thinking. They become curious about you. And when you do speak, they listen more carefully because they've learned that you don't waste words. Your contribution to value ratio increases dramatically. Machiavelli's final lesson on this is about economy. Just as a prince must conserve his resources for battles that matter, you must conserve your verbal energy for moments that matter. Not every discussion deserves your participation. Not every provocation deserves your response. Not every silence needs to be filled. The discipline is in discernment, knowing when your words will move things forward versus when they'll just add to the noise. This economy extends to how you use silence itself. There are different kinds of silence, and they communicate different things. There's the silence of contempt, which dismisses what's being said. There's the silence of confusion, which asks for clarification without words. There's the silence of calculation, which says you're processing. And there's the silence of mastery, which suggests you've already understood and decided. Learning to deploy these different silences is like learning to speak a second language, one that's often more precise than words. Jung's perspective on this would emphasize integration. You're not trying to become someone who never speaks. You're integrating silence as a tool alongside speech. The shadow work here is recognizing that for most of us, silence has been made shameful. We've been taught that it's rude, that it's passive, that it's a sign of having nothing to contribute. But this teaching serves the collective, not the individual. The collective needs everyone participating, everyone sharing, everyone being transparent and available. It makes people easier to predict and manage. But you're not here to make yourself easier to manage. You're here to develop your own power, your own capacity to shape outcomes. And sometimes, often, that requires keeping your own counsel. It requires letting others show their hands while you keep yours close. It requires being comfortable with being misunderstood or underestimated because you know the truth of your own capability. Nietzsche's challenge is relevant here. Can you stand alone? Can you be the person in the room who doesn't need to speak, doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need constant validation? This is harder than it sounds because it means accepting the fundamental loneliness of consciousness. You are ultimately alone with your thoughts, your decisions, your path. And trying to dissolve this loneliness through constant communication is a doomed strategy. It never works. You just end up diluting yourself. The alternative is to embrace that loneliness, that separateness, as the foundation of your strength. You are alone. Your consciousness is yours. Your decisions are yours. And you don't owe anyone real-time access to your internal process. This isn't coldness. It's boundaries. It's respect for the sanctity of your own mind. And when you establish these boundaries, something interesting happens. People respect them. They might not like them, but they respect them. There's a practical outcome to all of this that Machiavelli would appreciate. You become harder to play against. In any competitive or political environment, people are constantly trying to figure each other out, predict each other's moves, find leverage. The more you speak, the more data you give them, the more predictable you become. But when you speak sparingly and strategically, you remain a puzzle. People can't quite figure out your angle. They can't predict how you'll respond. And this unpredictability is a form of power because it makes you a wild card in any game. But beyond tactics, there's something deeper here. There's a kind of peace that comes from not needing to constantly broadcast yourself into the world. A stillness that develops when you're not always performing, always producing, always trying to shape how others see you. You get to just be present, aware, engaged, but not desperate to be seen or heard or understood in any particular way. This is what Machiavelli's strategy of silence ultimately offers: liberation from the exhausting performance of constant verbal self-creation. You get to exist as you are, letting your actions speak for themselves, letting your presence carry its own weight. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything through words. You're simply being someone worth paying attention to when you do choose to speak. The final image to carry forward: a room full of people talking, debating, performing their intelligence and passion and expertise. And in that room, there's someone who isn't doing any of that. They're just sitting there, watching, listening, understanding. They're not withdrawn or checked out. They're intensely present, but they're not participating in the verbal competition. And because they're not participating, they're winning a different game entirely. They're accumulating understanding while everyone else is expending energy. They're seeing the structure while everyone else is caught in the content. And when they finally do speak, their words don't just add to the conversation. They reframe it. They cut through the noise and point to something essential that everyone else missed because they were too busy talking to see. This is mastery. This is control without speaking. This is power that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone in the room can feel it. If you're drawn to this path, if you're tired of the constant performance and ready to explore the power of strategic silence, subscribe. Keep learning. Keep practicing. Keep discovering that the less you speak, the more weight your words carry. And the more weight your words carry, the less you need to speak. It's a virtuous cycle that leads to a kind of presence most people never achieve because they're too busy talking to discover it.